So some of you may remember a video I did in response on Vaush relative to that of Thomas Sowell. In that argument, he basically admitted that he hasn't read any of Thomas Sowell's work, which really should say something. He never really made an argument, it was mostly just a case of abusing him. Of course, he does go into that a wee bit in this particular video. He kind of takes him out of context. Just have a listen to what, of course, the argument is.
I think we're talking at cross purposes. On the one hand, we're talking about results.
So this is Thomas Sowell dismantles egalitarianism. Okay, let's do it.
That we're hoping for. On the other hand, we're talking about processes that we're setting in motion. You're saying, should we hope for certain kinds of lessening of inequality and so on? The real question, the political question is, shall we set in motion certain processes because we hope for that? And do those processes enhance or reduce freedom? And I think the argument that Milton is making, certainly the argument that I would make, is that the attempt at doing these things, and it doesn't really matter, it's a complete straw man to talk about absolute inequality. No,
yes,
not at all.
It is,
no.
Absolutely. Throughout the film, this is the straw man he brings up in order to say how ridiculous to have absolute equality. And then he goes on to say how ridiculous to have absolute
My whole point is,
homogenization as well.
as a result, you see, that you set up processes whose end result may not be any more or less inequality than exists now, but the question is, those processes may indeed reduce freedom greatly. I would go.
Okay, so there are two types of equality: equality of outcome and equality of I guess of process. Equality from a sort of foundational position. So this is the some people call it equity versus equality. Oh, equality of opportunity. Thank you. Yeah. Though honestly, I would argue even equality of opportunity is kind of a misnomer. Because nobody has the same opportunities in life. It's more, have we done everything we can to ensure that everyone's getting a fair shake, a fair chance at an equal outcome?
So the argument is based on equality. Now, Vaush is speaking about equal opportunity or equal outcomes, and he's trying to say that nobody makes the argument on equal outcomes. There are particular people who actually do make that argument on equal outcomes. I've known feminists to make the argument. I've known some folk who support that of the universal basic income to make that, particular argument, which is a really silly argument to say the least. And that's something I do agree with Vaush on, that it is a silly argument. Where Vaush goes wrong is he's going on about this today with the equal opportunity. Now, there's no such thing. It's every bit as utopian when you're speaking about equal opportunity. I have used the term before, but what I'm actually meaning is more today with the freedom of opportunity. I think that's the best expression, and Tom Woods had made this distinction between the freedom of opportunity to the equality of opportunity. They're two entirely different things. Equal opportunity is irrational because no two people are the same. We're all unequal. And in order to try and create some form of egalitarianism, regardless of what it is, you're going to have to try and control the economy. You could talk about this today with education or healthcare. They speak about this today with the universal education, universal healthcare. Oh, it should be available for everyone. I've heard that argument used many times when it came to the state education system here or that of the NHS, which just isn't the case. Thomas Sowell is basically saying that if you're wanting to try and achieve any form of so-called equality, you're going to have to sacrifice freedom. There's more employment opportunity, and that's what you typically find through that of a free market economy. There's stronger opportunity for you to make something of yourself, whereas Vaush is basically trying to make the argument that somehow freedom is correlative to that of, the welfare state, etc. Somehow a greater access, freedom for people to make something of themselves, which just isn't the case. It requires the higher tax rates. You're subordinating individuals' rights and liberty to begin with, so that's anti-libertarian, it's anti-freedom. It doesn't create greater opportunity. In fact, it comes at a greater cost on society as a whole. You have to sacrifice elsewhere in the economy to pay for the welfare state, etc. Where these socialists go wrong is they strangle the private sector half to death. That's it. If, of course, he supports a private sector. I'm not entirely sure if he does or no. But even if he supports the private sector, then you could bet your bottom dollar he basically is supportive of trying to create egalitarianism, because later in his argument, he tries to diss deregulation, as if to say deregulation is going to be problematic to the economy, destroys opportunity, and leads to concentration of wealth and power into the hands of the few. Oh, it's all for the giant corporations. They don't have a clue about economic history. They've not even got a clue about economics. They don't even understand cronyism to begin with, because cronyism is essentially something that stems from government's regulation. In other words, corporatism is all about strong government regulation over the private sector, and this is what giant corporations lobby for, is more government regulation to stamp out the competition of smaller business people. Of course, they seek special interest favours, and that's what corporatism is about. The merger between state and corporate power, which eventually then leads to corporatocracy, which is where the giant corporations soon run the government. What completely contradicts Vaush in his entire argument in his video, the equal opportunity, and this is what things should be, and how it creates so-called freedom when it really doesn't. It reduces opportunity in the market. He doesn't seem to understand, because he tries to go on about this today with the Scandinavian economies, because he's predictable. He's like the book that's been read 1 billion times over. These Scandinavian countries have low levels of government regulation. In other words, countries like Denmark had strongly deregulated their economy in 2001, and they stormed past 2008 without a problem. They're actually more capitalist than what the United States of America is. In other words, these countries have low levels of government regulation, they've got strong economic business freedom, is why they've been able to sustain themselves for as long as they have. The problem with these countries is the higher tax rates. Yes, they do have the, big welfare states, there's no denying that fact. It comes at a very heavy cost. So it's not just from income tax, you've got all the sales taxes, etc, etc. And it ends up pushing the costs of goods and services up because there's a lack of productivity. Now, no economy can sustain itself over the long period of time with higher tax rates because of the lack of productivity. And if they try to point to countries like Norway and say, oh, look at their high GDP, they obviously don't understand the fact that the high GDP that Norway has came off the back of the energy sector. That is to say that they were abusing the North Sea oil for the past 5 to 6 decades. So obviously they've got a high GDP because it came off the back of being too heavily dependent upon the North Sea oil. The whole point of economics is to find the most efficient system possible that enables you to translate scarce natural resources into commodities to provide for the market whilst using the fewest resources possible, because resources are not infinite. Now, these hypocrites love to tell you that how under a capitalist system it would use up all the world's resources. These are the same type of people that make those arguments, but there they are. They would turn a blind eye to those countries being so heavily dependent upon the natural resources, and that's where the high GDP came from. A country like Norway, for example, the Kongsberg Automotive, that's an example of a company that only has 5% of their workforce left in Norway because most of their workforce work abroad in countries like China, Mexico, the United States. They cannot afford to produce in their own home country simply because of the higher tax rates. There is a detrimental effect and impact on these countries because of the higher tax rates, all in the name of paying for the big welfare states. But what Vaush also does not tell you in his video, he doesn't tell you the very fact that there's a strong difference between that of official figures of unemployment and real unemployment figures. The official figures only account for basically based on who's recently been made redundant in the past year, whereas real figures of unemployment accounts for everyone, including those who have been long-term unemployed. And when you look at countries like Denmark, because of the higher tax rates, etc., and the lack of productivity, etc., etc., when you look at those countries, their real unemployment rate is more than 3 times higher than that of the official figures. You know, they'll always go on about these Scandinavian countries and speak about the happiness index. It's always this thing, and I've refuted that before in the past. It's every bit as credible as someone saying that President Obama won a Nobel Peace Prize, for crying out loud. You know, somebody who drone striked innocent children, you know, abroad. You can't take these people seriously. And they're always going to bring up these Scandinavian countries, but what Vaush did not tell you about was those Scandinavian countries with their so-called universal healthcare systems, etc. That's all been funded by the United States taxpayer. See, if it wasn't for the United States taxpayer, if it wasn't for the United States of America, those countries would not have the universal healthcare systems because they wouldn't be able to afford it anyway. Apparently these healthcare systems, universal healthcare, like the NHS for example, is apparently all for equal opportunity. That is to say, it's available for everyone. The reality of those healthcare systems, etc., just like that of the NHS, is faced with the massive big long waiting lines and therefore neglect. And Thomas Sowell, you know, just happened to touch upon this in his book Basic Economics, where a 12-year-old lassie was being seen to first to get a boob job, and yet there was cancer patients who were on 15-month long waiting lists, and one particular woman who had cancer or something like that, and she was knocked back countless times for an operation, and eventually, of course, by the time they get around to her, you know, it was already too late because it became malignant. Whilst there are, you know, people that are saved by healthcare systems like the NHS, etc., there's others who are unfortunate. In fact, a lot of people are unfortunate, and that's got absolutely nothing at all to do with that of the recent pandemic and everything. That's got everything to do with the fact it's the NHS. You've got to laugh at someone like Vaush calling Thomas Sowell an idiot when, you know, Vaush doesn't even understand essentially what a market economy is. A market economy, I've pointed out before, and I'll point this out again, is relative to that of a capitalist system. Anybody who tries to redefine what a market economy is to fit it around socialism, they're not defining socialism. All they're doing is they're trying to mix, you know, capitalism in with socialism. That's essentially what they're doing. Listen to this first of all. Folk, the reason why deregulating the economy creates greater opportunity is because businesses have more freedom to employ more people. They have more freedom to run business. They're more free to be more productive, and plus the fact they can afford to be more productive because of the lower tax rates, etc., or in the absence of the income tax. There's more freedom for businesses to start up, and plus the fact because there's not the barrier to entry into the market, fierce competition steps in and is enticed to step in. The reason why the likes of Vaush and their argument collapses, he makes the argument and he uses the term corporations as if to say that's the same thing as corporatism. I can understand Some people might not favour corporations, fair enough, but that doesn't automatically define corporatism. Corporatism is the merger between state and corporate power. The giant trusts in the late 19th century were not enacting in that to do with corporatism relative to what he's arguing. Corporatism was more to do with special interest groups that would lobby government for special interest favours. That is to say that he just uses the term corporations and somehow expects you to believe that somehow this would then result from deregulation and the so-called dangerous concentration of wealth in the hands of the few. That's contradicted because between 1840 right up to 1900, you would see wealth redistribution remain the same in terms of 70% going to the workers and 30% to that of the capital and resource suppliers, and that was even during the period of the myth of the robber barons. Of course, that would never sit well with those type of people. If you were to ask those type of people where they can name a monopoly, where the free market caused a monopoly, they wouldn't be able to do it. And any example they fling at you have been examples of either myths or examples that stemmed from government interference. And it's the same story with that to do with the cartels and the oligopolies. All the monopolies, etc., all stemmed because of government's interference. So when he talks about this issue to do with deregulation and then starts using the term corporations as if to act smart, as if to say deregulation is what lead to corporatism, that is just complete and utter crap folk. And it's just like those type of people who sit there and claim to you, oh, big business, as if to say all big business is evil. You know, it's just such a simplistic worldview, and he takes Thomas Sowell out of context. You know, the way he paints things of what Thomas Sowell is saying, he's trying to make it out as if, you know, Thomas Sowell is a simp, as he calls it, for corporations. But that's not to say that all corporations are bad. It's just like saying that's not to say all big business is bad. In fact, big businesses are very beneficial to the economy, and one could argue even big corporations can be very beneficial to the economy. In the linear thought process, in the worldview of a socialist, they just think, oh, big business, corporatism, oh, giant corporation, oh, it must mean they stole all the wealth, because they just don't understand history, they don't understand economics, and that is really everything of what sums up Vaush's argument in his entire video, basically. Now, I could have went through, you know, bit by bit, and it would have went on for a good length, but I think that really covers the basis of the argument. The issue over his argument stating that the welfare state is somehow equal to freedom is just laughable, to say the least. It comes at a very heavy cost on the economy. You're sacrificing individuals' liberty and rights. You're forcing people to pay for others, which is not freedom. Does not actually create greater opportunity. It destroys opportunity elsewhere in the economy because you're compensating elsewhere in order to pay for it. Higher tax rates, for example, destroys opportunity. There's less employment as a result of that. Because if you've got, and this is the thing, because people like him seem to believe that if you've got higher tax rates, that means you've got more money in your pocket. That just doesn't make sense. If they're paying higher taxes, they've got less money in their pocket. It's like I said, there are dire consequences for your good intentions that you may have. It's just like how people like him might support things like that of the minimum wage, and I can tell you it most certainly does lead to greater unemployment. It's just like that of his attempt for greater redistribution of wealth. Now, Sweden is a prime example. Before the 1960s, they had high levels of equality proven by the Gini coefficient. They were a free market economy. They had extremely low levels of government regulation. Along came the heavy nationalisation, strong government regulation, the big extensive welfare state, and before you know it, they dropped from 4th richest nation per capita GDP in the world down to the 14th richest. But according to Vaush, that somehow made them better off. You could go through every single mixed economy, and you will not find a single mixed economy in historical context in any way. Nowhere will you find an economy that had outperformed a tiny small fishing village like Hong Kong between 1948 to 1997. Every single mixed economy has pretty much fell stagnant, could never compete a free market in the month of Sundays for that of, productivity, and most certainly couldn't even come close to rivaling free markets when it comes to employment opportunity. So where he gets the entire argument from, saying that somehow through all these welfare statism, etc., and all that government interventionism has somehow led to greater freedom and greater opportunity for people, it's just complete and utter nonsense. It's a bit like someone saying to you that the likes of the NHS created greater equality. Did it really? With all those people neglected every single year, thousands of people neglected every single year on record since 1948. But yeah, apparently that's available for everyone. Vaush really does not have a leg to stand on. He doesn't understand anything at all today with that of the scarcity. He's got no clue about that of the laws of supply and demand. We'll just, make it accessible for absolutely everyone. Yeah, very good. What happened when you tried that with the education system? Oh, that's right, you're now complaining that they can no longer afford to go to college or university, as you may call it. The reason why they can't afford to go to the colleges, etc., is simply because you created the problem, and the reason why you created the problem is because you tried to make it available for everyone, because you can't ignore the laws of supply and demand. But, what does that matter, according to him? It's just like the time, along came the free tuition fees. As a result of the so-called free tuition fees, there's only 11 placements available for studying photography and a degree at university for each university. You want to know why that is? Because you're compensating. You're cutting back in placements. So how then do you consider that equality? There's a lack of placements available. Again, he doesn't understand the laws of supply and demand. He doesn't understand the broken window fallacy. He doesn't understand that just because you see something from face value saying, oh, it's free at the point of use, doesn't mean it's more affordable. You have to ask where the money is going to come from to pay for it. And that question never gets answered. How convenient of him, however, to touch upon that of corporations relative to do with corporatism. He supports strong government interference in the economy, which is essentially what gave rise to the corporatist system to begin with. What an oxymoron, folk. You've just got to laugh at the stupidity of people like him. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you like the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and of course, be sure to share the video or whatever. If you get any questions or that, feel free to fire in the comment section below. I do apologise, at times some of my comments are being deleted by YouTube for whatever reason being, but I'll try and get back to you. Thank you for watching, I shall talk to you later. Cheers.